everybody. Hi, it's Becky from powertoolswiththread.com. That's my blog. Today is part 2 and the last part of the Easter Lily and Cross sew along that we're doing from Sweet Pea Embroidery Designs. And I will put a link right up here to the video of part 1, and you can take a look at that if you're interested in doing that. There's a couple of things that I want to show you in this particular part. This is where we're going to put all of the panels together. So there are 3 panels. There's part 1, part 2, and part 3. If you recall when we did the stitching, the original stitch, the first stitch is to tack down the batting. Then you remove the hoop, you trimmed around the outside edges of the batting, and then you laid down your background fabric face up, and then it did another stitch. Those 2 stitches comprise these 2 stitches. I'm going to get up real close so you can see these 2 stitches right here. All right, so the outer stitch, this one has little purple dots because I used a purple thread around that so you could see. The outer stitch, and then the inner stitch is the stitch for the batting. When you go to sew these together, you want to aim to sew in between these 2 stitches. When you do that, you're going to capture the outer edge of the stitching in your seam allowance. And that's what you're after, so that the seam allowance from your panel doesn't show from the front side. So take a look at the back of your project, and all the way around there are 2 lines of stitching. Aim to sew in between those 2 lines of stitching. Now that said, depending on how everything works out, you might have to maybe go inside that inner line of stitching, but that's okay too. The idea is no matter what, you need to capture the outer line of stitching in the seam allowance. Point number 2 about this. That was point number 1. Point number 2. When I trim these are fresh out of the hoop. No trimming has been done on them at all. I'm going to trim the top and the bottom and not the sides for now. It is more important to match up. When we go to match these, I'm going to show you. When you go to put these together, whoop, this one's upside down. This goes like this, and this one, okay, this is how they go. And I want to show you what I'm going to go for. It is more important to match up your satin stitching on the sides and the center. This is where it gets tricky. Than it is to match up your edges. The edges will be taken care of later. But it is more important to match up these satin rows of stitching. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Where the instructions tell you, oh, you've cut your 1/2 inch seam allowances, now just slap it all together. If you do that, the odds of you getting all these satin stitches together straight so they make straight lines is pretty low. You need to focus first. You're going to match centers, and then the edges of the cross, the sides of the cross, and then I wouldn't even worry about matching out to the sides because we're going to trim that off anyway, and it'll be flipped and turned inside of the backing. So match center, match sides. To help you do that, I recommend that you use a product called Steam-A-Seam. Instead of just pinning them together, what you want to do is glue them together first using the Steam-A-Seam. Get everything all lined up exactly like you want. You want to do this at your ironing station or your ironing board. And what I'm going to do when I trim these is I'm going to leave this bottom side flat like this. The top one is going to be folded down, and I'm going to fold it so that you shouldn't be able to see any of the pink fabric when I fold this down, you shouldn't be able to see any of the pink fabric from the front, okay? Now this edge can be matched exactly with the panel above it. So kind of keep that in mind to fold it down tight, and you want to iron it and maybe even pin it. And then you're going to put your steam seam and then you will marry those up. And I'll take the camera over to the ironing board and show you how to do that. This edge of stitching right here, this top edge of stitching, that needs to be to the back. I mean, we're talking thread widths to the, fold it to the back so that you cannot see this, that stitching line. Because if you don't, you're going to see the stitching line to the outside. And you don't want to do that. The problem is that this right here is very bulky in satin stitching. And it may not work, and it's already coming loose right there. That's okay. It's going to be caught in the seam allowance. And you have a tiny little bit right here where you can make that match up and make it look right. So match centers first, then the edge of the cross, and then glue it all down. And I don't know if you remember in the first video, I told you how forgiving embroidery could be. And one of the things to make my point, I had originally thought that I wanted this green corner to be here at the bottom point of the wall hanging. And I did that, and after I stitched it out, I really didn't like it. It was just too striking. I guess it was too, I just didn't care for it. So I backed the embroidery machine up a stitch and stitched it again with a different color fabric on the top of it. So see, embroidery can be very forgiving if you change your mind, even make a mistake or change your mind. Another thing, if you haven't stitched this out yet, in the first video I told you that I was actually putting 2 layers down for the lily. It was the white fabric, and I used a piece of cutaway stabilizer underneath the lily to make it more opaque so that you couldn't see through it. Well, even so, I could still see the purple cross pretty strongly through the white fabric, even with that extra piece of stabilizer to make it more opaque. So what I ended up doing was stopping the machine, and I went in and trimmed out the pieces of the cross that were going to have the lily piece on top of them. So then once I did that, I could stitch this on and it looks just fine. So you may want to consider doing that as well. It doesn't hurt the project at all, and it might make it look a little bit better. The first thing I want to do now is trim up these panels, and I'm going to trim my long sides next to the cross. It says to trim at 1/2 inch, and what that means is 1/2 inch away from the outer edge of the stitching, from the outer stitch line, not from the outer edge of the project. You do not need to remove the stabilizer from behind the project. Just go ahead and measure 1/2 inch from here out and trim this off. On this bottom panel, just go ahead and trim straight across on here for now. Okay, so let's go over to the ironing board and get this all put together. So like I said, I'm going to leave this top panel as is, and then this middle panel, I'm going to turn it so that the top edge of stitching is just on the other side of the fold. This is the hardest part, getting these right. Very nice. That looks like that's going to work. Let me get up close so you can see. Now, I'm going to take steam a seam, and I'm going to put it just on that stitch line here. Just on it. I want that to be the glue spot. Not below it, not over it, just barely on it, so that you cannot see the stitching, but you haven't gone over it. There. This stuff can be tricky. It works good, but it pull up and it stretches. It's okay. Stay there. Get off me. I feel like a cat with a piece of tape on my paw. So now, like I said before, so now this is folded under like 1/8 of an inch. Match center. Look straight down at it. Match center. That looks so good. Get over the edge and match the ends. You might have to kind of, you know, when you get out here, you might have to, one way or the other, up or down, to get it to meet exactly. But that is the look we are after. And if you notice your edges, the side stitching is they're probably not even, and that's okay, because that's going to be hidden in the seam allowance. What is the most important is to match the center and match the edges of the cross. All right, now pins to hold this together in the seam allowance. Now what I'm going to do is, at the sewing machine, I'm going to go back and sew in between those 2 outer stitch lines. See, the center of the cross looks great. This end looks great. This end, I'm not going to be picky about that. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing on the bottom. You want to match up your center of the cross first, and then you have a stem to match over here as well. Place center first. You don't want to be able to see the seam. Place the stem. Oh, that looks good. And y'all, there's a good 1/8 of an inch right here on the side that they did not meet. See, you don't want to match those sides first. Perfect. Okay. I'm going to pin, and I'm going to go sew in between those 2 seam lines. The bottom part of this lined up just fine. I like that. This one up here, it was like a 1/16 of an inch off where they didn't match, and it made me nuts. So I went in and unpicked it just a little bit to like right here, and then went back in and put more steam of seam. So now I'm ready to go back and stitch again. In a quilt, if you make a mistake, sometimes it'll get hidden in the quilting, but this is something where every time I look at it, it will make me crazy. And I know that about me, and I'm okay with that. It doesn't always work out perfect the first time. If it's something that will make you nuts, absolutely go back and fix that. And make it so that it's going to turn out the way you want. Now I'm holding these together tightly. I did re-steam them already. And I'm going to just pin this and take it back to the machine and stitch this down in that in between those 2 seams again, and don't poke myself. That is much better in my book. I can live with that. I can stare at it from across the room, and it's going to be okay. So now the instructions tell you to press the seams open. Well, we've got steam of seam in there. You know, just get in there and open them up, and you may just want to fold back a piece of the stabilizer. This is just to reduce bulk. Oh, that's so pretty. So pretty. Okay, now we need to make the tabs so that they can hang. You can hang your wall hanging. I had just done this and forgot to push record on the camera, so I'm going to do it again. I want my tabs to be 3 inches wide and 3 inches long from the fold. So I have a 6-inch wide piece of fabric, and I have folded it into the center on both of pieces. It doesn't really matter how long they are. I'm more concerned with getting this coloring right is what I'm looking for. Instead of making a mark where I want to fold it, I make a mark where I want to fold it too. So for a 3-inch tab, I'm going to put it at the 6-inch mark, and then take a friction marker and make a line, and that's where I want to fold it too on both of these. Okay. And then I'm just going to use my ruler to get that nice and straight and press it. If it leaves a little mark, that's okay. If you don't have a friction and you just want to even use an ink pen, it's no big deal, because this is going to be in the seam allowance. I'm going to pin these just like this, and then same with this one. And now I'm going to get scissors and I want to trim my tabs at the ends. Put them as they would be. Let's see, that's more pink. This is orange. I'm going for the orange. I think this is closer to the pattern. See that? That'll work. All right, so I'm going to measure in 1 inch from the outer edge right here. Make a mark. And this is where I want my tabs to go right there. Yeah, that'll look fine. Okay, and now once you figure out how you want them, fold them down, flip top to bottom, and put them right on that stitching line and then pin. I'm pinning at a diagonal so they don't decide to flip around on me when I'm not looking. Again, if this is the way you want them to be oriented, then you want to flip them down top to bottom, line up with the mark that you made. And this is all subjective based on how big you want your tabs. If they're more narrow, you might want them further in. So that's completely up to you. Now we are ready to put on the backing. All right, I'm really stretching my scraps on this one, so I'm not folding and cutting my fabric exactly to the directions. You want to trim your sides now to the 1/2 inch away from the outer seam line, and then take your top piece and put it face down. Like I said, I'm stretching my scraps here, guys, because I don't have enough. If I was to fold this up perfectly in half, this piece is too short. That's okay, not a big deal. In the end, it's not going to matter that there's only one piece of fabric filling up this top half. You won't even see that. That will be on the inside. So this is making do, okay? And you want them right sides together. Maybe I want... Let's see, this is going to be green up at the top when it folds over. How obvious will that be? Maybe I want pink at the top. Maybe I want pink at the top instead. See, that's the thing when you do these ombre fabrics. You just have to make sure you've got enough to cover for your seam allowance on both sides. That'll be fine like that. And then this one, the green will be at the bottom. And overlap them by 1 inch. That will work. Okay. I'm going to pin this in the middle, and then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, flip it over, and sew it in between those 2 seam lines, just like we did sewing all of this together all the way around. You want to leave an opening on the side somewhere to flip and turn this. Okay, now that I have sewn it all around, I want to trim to 1/2 inch. The only place I did not sew within the 2 seam lines was on the top. I did go ahead and give a 1/4 inch seam allowance just to make sure I captured those tabs. Better safe than sorry. You may want to trim the bulk from the corners. It might be helpful to go ahead and 45-degree angle trim, I should say, or thereabouts. Trim the bulk out of those corners. And down here in the bottom, this fabric's going to need somewhere to go. So I would recommend doing, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to trim some V's right here, like 2 of them. I'm going to cut almost 2, but not through the seam, because when that flips and turns, it's going to get bulky right there, especially with all the stabilizer. I mean, you might want to even trim the stabilizer out, but this will give that, that's a trick from the garment sewing industry. Well, that will just give all of that some room, give it somewhere to go. I'm going to cut away this stabilizer here. And if you flip it and it seems bulky, then, you know, turn it back inside out and trim this away. All right, that's better. That looks good. Now it is time to turn it. Excess bulk out of here makes all the difference in the world, guys. When you go to iron this, you're going to want to iron it. Stay. You're going to want to iron it so that you don't see this edge from the front. You want to kind of roll it back a little bit, and it'll be bulky on the seams where the panels came together, but it's worth your while to go ahead and do that. But take the time to roll this back, get that seam so that you can see it from the back and you don't see it from the front, especially if, like on mine, it's a different color. Okay, you want that rolled to the back. It just looks more professional. Oh my goodness, you guys, this just turned out so pretty. I'm gonna go seriously iron this and be back in a minute. All right, so I have ironed it all down, and a trick from the garment sewing world, you may want to use a clapper. A clapper is a tailor's tool that is untreated wood that when you press down, these are great for bulky seams. When you press something, you get it just the way you want it. You put steam on it and then really press it with the clapper. Put some weight into it and you will get a beautiful crease that won't go away. And it will stay and not look all bulky and rumply. Yes, that's a word. If you don't have a clapper, a child's wooden play block will work because you want untreated wood. There's something about the moisture from the steam that gets taken up into the wood that just really makes a difference. Look how nice that looks from the front when you use a clapper. It just looks so pretty, you guys. To seal mine up, I made sure my inner my lower piece, the seam, the stitching line was rolled to the inside and ironed down. And then I used a piece of stitch witchery, not steam-a-seam. I used stitch witchery. And I'll link to some of that below. That's really a nice product. All right, you guys, that's it. This turned out so beautiful. I am very, very pleased with it. I encourage you to think outside the box on your fabric choices. I had a lot of fun making this, and I am all ready for Easter now with no stress. We've got a couple of months until Easter. We'll talk to you soon. Go sew something. Bye.